Welcome back, this is Tucker. Let's talk weather. We're tracking our next potential hurricane and the threat it may pose to land. I also have an update on the polar vortex and how long this cool weather is here to stay. Hey guys, welcome in, welcome back. Hope you're having a great week. It's been really quiet here in the Northeast, but lucky for me, I get to talk about active weather elsewhere in the country. So let me know where you're watching from, and we're going to be talking about this colder air entering the U.S. right now. You can see our cold front there, bringing the cooler air in, and you'll see in a second when this refreshes, a lot of wildfire smoke. See all that gray stuff on our satellite? But in addition to the colder air, we have a hurricane threat, at least developing, and we're going to start our forecast off with that. Let's take a trip to the Atlantic, and we're not talking a royal cruise. We're talking quite the opposite. A storm, an area of interest we're looking at that will be named Gabrielle by the end of the weekend, if not sooner. And you can see by the path it's on right now, it would be making an approach close to land. So this is something to monitor closely. And right now, we're going to jump into the latest track and strength this storm is expected to reach in the next several days. Here's the latest data on the track this storm is taking. This is just out the next 5 days or so. So we're going to take a longer look here in a moment too. But to start you off, what you're seeing more or less is a track that is going to be moving towards the Lesser Antilles Islands. Not a huge range of outcomes here, so models are pretty confident that the Lesser Antilles are at least in the line of sight. So, some of those tropical islands you may vacation to, St. Martin, U.S. Virgin Islands, British Virgin Islands, stuff like that. We're also keeping an eye on the potential strength of this storm. Now, the good news here is that while it does ramp up to a tropical storm pretty quickly, after about 3-4 days out, it's going to reach a point where we may end up seeing some weakening, or this will slowly strengthen. A lot of our weather models are suggesting this stays a tropical storm or gets to weak hurricane status. To me, I see weak hurricane status as very reasonable, but it does not look like it has high-end potential, at least not right now. Part of the reason the potential is a little bit more limited is because of the shear, and you can see the area I highlighted here. Those red colors indicating higher than normal wind shear, and that, while it's not overbearing, it is going to be enough to keep it from really picking up strength. I'll show you when we get to the path, though. There is still some outcomes in which it begins to move up the coast. Now, there is shear that will help keep it from getting too strong in that scenario, too, but let's talk about how close it could come and the other impacts it may bring. For that, we go here to our ensemble members, and we're watching our storm core right here. You're going to see all those numbers, those red numbers indicating possible outcomes for this storm and where the center of it's going to be. And as we move into the start of next week, actually really the middle of next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, you can see our storm in a pretty close cluster here. It's very likely to be making at least a pass of the Lesser Antilles Islands like we talked about. Anywhere you're seeing those orange colors, that's where it's likely reaching hurricane strength. And so it's especially the northern Lesser Antilles. Those are there's a name for it. I'll think of it later. But it's going to be moving up the coastline after that as it's sort of navigating around this high pressure system. So I'm going to continue to push this. We're looking at Friday the 12th right now, Saturday the 13th, Sunday the 14th. And you can see our storm likely on a path after it goes through the islands up the east coast. Now, it is going to stay pretty far away, but similar to what we saw with Aaron, there will be potential impacts to our coastline as it does make a reasonably close pass. Looks like our data fell out there, but if it does continue on this path here, we'll have to wait and see when it makes that turn back out to sea. But nonetheless, it is going to be making at least a reasonably close pass and one that will need to be monitored for more potential coastline impacts. All right, now we're going to take a look at the polar vortex and the changing weather in the lower 48. But also want to let you know, I'm a meteorologist. I'm not going to hype things up. And if you're looking for a guy to trust on the internet, it gives you weather information, may or may not have found a guy right here. Not so hard to see the polar vortex right now, and you can see this ridge, this area of higher pressure right here. That higher pressure spins counterclockwise. It can help pull air out of the Arctic, and here is the polar vortex up here in the Arctic, and basically what's happening is a lobe of that is slipping out and into the U.S., and that's what this deep blue coloration is here. That is a piece of the polar vortex. We don't talk about it as much here in the fall and nonetheless the summer, but it still occurs and it still brings abnormally cold weather to the U.S. And you're going to see that colder air mass sitting here for a little while, although over time it will lose some of its Arctic characteristics as it spends time away from home, so to speak. But even into next week, much of the eastern U.S. is going to stay colder than average. We're looking at the 8th, the 9th here, and it really will take some time for that air mass to recover. So I expect into, the 10th, the 11th even, if you're in the eastern half of the U.S., it's certainly going to feel like fall. And especially if you're in the north central U.S. where that air mass will be coldest. But just giving you an early look at next week, we do have some recovery, at least in the central U.S., as this warmer air mass tries to take over here, but as a whole, it may still be on the cooler side across our coastlines and particularly the northeast. Now, when we have big changing of the guard in terms of air masses, we typically get some storms, and that's what we're going to see here. And actually, we're looking at the eastern U.S. on Saturday. Across the mid-Atlantic here, all the way into New England, we have the threat for some severe weather. This is largely a damaging wind threat, but look at that. You can see all the orange colors that pop up here. That's your cold front, and that colder air really beginning to move in. And as it does, it's going to initiate those storms. So Saturday, certainly, if you're in the eastern U.S., especially along the Appalachian Mountains or into New England, you do need to keep an eye to the sky. Elsewhere, the weather will be quite quiet because of that area of high pressure, which will be dominating most of the U.S., and you can see that storm activity on the outer fringes of it. Still will be some pop-up storms in the Rockies, still a couple pop-up storms in the south, but nothing severe or particularly noteworthy here. And moving into the start of next week, high pressure still dominates the eastern U.S. The country as a whole will be very quiet, in fact, and that will not change too much until we get towards Tuesday, Wednesday. We'll be watching some systems, not necessarily exactly where you're seeing this one, but we'll be watching some systems in the central U.S. as the warmer air comes back. That may bring some storms and some changes in the weather towards, like I said, the early middle days of next week. But as a whole, no really big storm systems in play here, as high pressure generally has a pretty good stronghold. In terms of high temperatures, Friday, you're looking at them here. Those are 50s in the north central U.S. for highs. Still very warm on the west coast this week, by the way. You guys will be exempt from the colder air as the Rockies sort of work as a wall and prevent it from getting in here. Looking at our Saturday highs and Sunday highs, you can see many of the same areas kind of cool. That cooler air mass slowly moves to the east. We're still talking highs in the 50s and 60s in the north central U.S., 70s across much of the country unless you're in the far southern U.S. or out on the west coast. And moving into next week, we do see that warmer weather begin to return. You're looking at Tuesday highs back in the 80s across much of the north central U.S., but staying in the 70s across a lot of the northeast and actually cooling down towards the middle of next week on the west coast as well. Those are highs back in the 70s out there. So certainly you're changing of the guard and the cooler air mass slipping east, but nonetheless, it's nothing that will last particularly long, at least out of the ordinary lows in the 60s. The 70s are at least going to be around next week too. And last but not least, our fall foliage update. We're going to do this real quick because there's not a lot to see out there. It's a lot of green across the U.S. Actually, in the spirit of colors, there we are. There's a lot of green out there. But we are looking at one area in the Rockies, a couple areas actually. This is new. Some areas around Salt Lake City, those high elevations, and some areas in the Rockies out here to the west of Denver that are showing the first signs of color in the lower 48. Certainly a lot more where that came from. And as we take a look at the season as a whole, Explore Fall here actually has a predictor. And anywhere you're seeing these greens, that's where we're going to be here at the end of October. So we're not too close yet, but we're also not that far either. So get ready for a lot of color that's going to be taking over, especially as we get into the early parts of October on the northern tier of the U.S. and in those higher elevations. Things are going to pop quickly. And these cooler days, these sunny days, and these dry nights generally will help to bring out the brightest colors. And with that, we're going to wrap things up. Don't want to take up too much of your time. So again, drop any questions you have in the comments. Thanks for watching as always. And we do these updates regularly, so check back for more, especially as we keep an eye on Gabrielle and any other weather that comes our way. Like I said, any questions, drop them in the comments. I do personal forecasts, and I hope to see you right back here next time.